Hello and welcome. Settle in, perhaps dim the lights. Tonight, we're not just telling stories. We're exploring a fracture in reality itself. We're venturing into those silent, terrifying gaps that can open up in the middle of an ordinary day. A quiet night, a familiar drive home. We're talking about the phenomenon of missing time. Imagine this. You're driving down a stretch of highway you've traveled 100 times before. It's late. The world outside your windows is a blur of darkness and the occasional flash of a streetlight. The hum of the engine is a familiar lullaby. You glance at the clock on your dashboard. It's 10:17 p.m. You blink, maybe yawn, adjusting your hands on the steering wheel. The next thing you know, you're pulling into your driveway. You feel a little groggy, but nothing unusual. You gather your things, step out of the car, and as you're about to lock the door, you glance at the clock again. It reads 1:42 a.m. A chill, colder than the night air, crawls up your spine. 3.5 hours. Gone. Not just forgotten, but erased. You don't remember stopping. You don't remember getting lost. You don't remember falling asleep. You try to retrace the journey in your mind, but there's a wall. A smooth, black, impenetrable wall between 10:17 p.m. and 1:42 a.m. Your car's gas tank is significantly lower than it should be. The odometer shows you've traveled an extra 60 miles. But 60 miles to where? What happened in those lost hours? This is the quintessential missing time experience. It's a terrifyingly personal and isolating event that leaves its victims questioning their own sanity, their memories, and the very nature of the world they thought they knew. It's more than just being forgetful. It's not like misplacing your keys or struggling to recall a name. This is a chunk of your existence, carved out with surgical precision, leaving behind nothing but a profound sense of dread and a universe of unanswerable questions. These are not just modern tales born of internet forums and creepypasta. This is an enduring mystery, a thread that runs through folklore, historical accounts, and countless modern testimonials. For decades, people from all walks of life, all over the globe, have reported these inexplicable lapses. A quiet afternoon walk that somehow lasts until after sundown. A short trip to the store that consumes an entire evening. Hours, sometimes even days, that have vanished without a trace. Tonight, we will delve into some of the most compelling and well-documented cases of missing time. We will listen to the stories of those who have returned from the void, forever changed by the hours they cannot account for. We will examine the patterns, the common threads that bind these disparate experiences together, the strange lights, the cryptic dreams, the physical marks left behind. And we will explore the theories, ranging from the psychological to the paranormal, from neurological glitches to whispers of contact with something not of this world. Because when time itself becomes untrustworthy, what can we possibly hold on to? This is the central, haunting question of the missing time phenomenon. It's a journey into the heart of an uncharted mystery, where the map is your own memory, and parts of it have been inexplicably torn away. So, stay with me as we attempt to piece together the fragments and stare into the abyss of those hours that were lost, but not forgotten. One of the first cases to bring this bizarre phenomenon into the public consciousness, and arguably the most famous, is the story of Betty and Barney Hill. Their experience in the White Mountains of New Hampshire in 1961 became the archetype for the modern abduction narrative, and at its core was a profound and disturbing period of missing time. Betty and Barney were, by all accounts, an ordinary, respectable couple. Barney was a postal worker, Betty a social worker. They were active in their local community and the NAACP. They were not prone to flights of fancy or seeking attention. On the night of September 19, 1961, they were driving home from a short vacation in Canada. It was late, and the roads were dark and empty. As they drove through the remote, mountainous landscape, Betty noticed a bright point of light in the sky. It seemed to be moving erratically, pacing their car. At first, they thought it was a satellite or an aircraft, but it grew larger and brighter, descending toward them. Barney, a pragmatic man and a World War II veteran, was skeptical. He pulled the car over several times to get a better look through his binoculars. The object was now clearly a craft of some kind, flat, circular, with a row of windows through which he could see figures moving. This is where the fear began to set in. The craft was silent, unnervingly so. It hovered directly over their car. Barney, overwhelmed by a sudden, terrifying certainty that they were about to be captured, slammed the car into gear and sped away. He told a panicked Betty, "They're not going to take me without a fight." The next thing they consciously remembered, they were hearing a strange, rhythmic beeping or buzzing sound. They looked at each other, feeling dazed and confused. They found themselves 35 miles further down the road, with no memory of having driven there. The initial terror of the craft had been replaced by a foggy sense of calm, but also a deep unease. They arrived home much later than they should have. Their watches had stopped working. Their shoes were scuffed, Betty's dress was torn, and there were strange, shiny spots on their car's trunk that caused a compass needle to spin wildly. And most unsettling of all, 2 hours of their night were completely, utterly gone. In the weeks and months that followed, the experience haunted them. Betty began having vivid, recurring nightmares of being taken aboard the craft by strange, short beings with large, cat-like eyes. In these dreams, she and Barney were subjected to a series of physical examinations. They were separated, laid out on tables in a sterile, metallic room. She recalled a long needle being inserted into her navel in a painful procedure she was told was a pregnancy test. She described a leader figure who showed her a three-dimensional star map, pointing out their trade routes and home planet. Barney's memory was more deeply buried. He suffered from anxiety, ulcers, and high blood pressure that worsened after the incident. Finally, at the recommendation of a doctor, they sought help from Dr. Benjamin Simon, a respected Boston psychiatrist and neurologist. Over a series of months in 1964, Dr. Simon placed both Betty and Barney under hypnosis to try and recover the memories from those 2 lost hours. What emerged was astonishing. Independently, and without knowledge of the others' detailed accounts, they told a chillingly consistent story. They recounted being forced to stop their car, taken from the road by these non-human entities, and escorted onto the silent, waiting craft. Barney, under hypnosis, recalled the terror of being unable to resist, of his eyes being removed and put back in, of scrapings being taken from his skin. His emotional distress during these sessions was so profound that Dr. Simon had to end them prematurely at times. The star map Betty described became one of the most intriguing pieces of evidence. Years later, an amateur astronomer and teacher named Marjorie Fish took on the monumental task of trying to identify the unique pattern of stars Betty had drawn from memory. After years of building three-dimensional models of nearby sun-like stars, she found a match. The pattern, she claimed, perfectly matched the view of our sun from the Zeta Reticuli star system, a binary pair of stars about 39 light-years away. Of course, the Hill case is not without its skeptics. Dr. Simon himself ultimately concluded that the abduction story was a shared fantasy, a confabulation created to fill the memory gap, possibly influenced by Betty's dreams and anxieties about their interracial marriage in a less tolerant time. Others point to an episode of the TV show The Outer Limits that aired just days before Barney's first hypnotic session, which featured an alien with large, wraparound eyes, suggesting a possible source of cultural contamination. But what about the missing time itself? Even if you dismiss the abduction narrative as a product of hypnosis and stress, the initial event remains. 2 hours, vanished on a dark mountain road. The physical evidence on the car, the simultaneous stopping of their watches, the shared, immediate sense that something profound and inexplicable had happened to them. The Hill story forced the world to confront a disturbing possibility, that human beings could be interfered with, their time and memories manipulated by forces beyond our comprehension. Their case laid the groundwork for thousands of similar reports that would follow, all echoing that same core element of time, inexplicably lost. The Betty and Barney Hill case may be the foundation, but the phenomenon of missing time is a structure built from countless other stories, each adding a new, unsettling layer to the mystery. Let's travel forward in time to August 1976, to the remote wilderness of the Allagash Waterway in northern Maine. This case is particularly compelling because it doesn't involve one or two people, but four. For friends, all art students, whose shared experience would be impossible to dismiss as individual delusion. The men were twin brothers Jack and Jim Weiner, along with their friends Chuck Rack and Charlie Faltz. They were on a canoeing and camping trip, an adventure deep in the Maine woods, far from civilization. They were experienced outdoorsmen, seeking solitude and inspiration for their art. On their fourth night, they decided to do some night fishing on Eagle Lake. They built a large, roaring bonfire on the shore to act as a beacon, a way to find their way back in the darkness. As they paddled out onto the still, black water, a silent, brilliant orb of light appeared in the sky above them. It was not a star, not a plane. It was immense, multicolored, and pulsating. Initially, their reaction was one of awe. As art students, they were captivated by the sheer beauty and strangeness of the light show. Chuck Rack, a skeptic, grabbed a flashlight and blinked it at the object in a Morse code SOS, half joking. Instantly, the orb shot a beam of light down towards their canoe. The mood shifted from wonder to pure terror. The light, described as being like a searchlight but somehow not solid, engulfed them completely. The next thing any of them knew, they were back in the canoe, paddling frantically towards the shore. The sense of panic was overwhelming, but the memory of what had just happened was hazy, dreamlike. When they reached the bank, they stumbled out of their canoe, shaken and confused. And then they saw the bonfire. The massive pyre they had built, which should have burned for hours, was now nothing more than a pile of glowing embers. It was as if hours had passed in the blink of an eye. They checked their watches. Several hours had vanished from the moment the beam of light had struck their canoe. They couldn't account for the time. They had no memory of what happened within that brilliant, silent light. They tried to rationalize it, to dismiss it. They packed up their camp in a state of shock and left the wilderness the next day, the unspoken fear hanging heavy between them. For years, the men rarely spoke of the incident. They tried to bury it, to move on with their lives. But the experience had left a deep psychological scar. Jim Weiner began to suffer from terrifying nightmares. He saw strange beings with large, insect-like eyes and long, four-fingered hands. He saw himself in a sterile room, being subjected to humiliating and painful medical procedures. The dreams were so vivid, so persistent, that they began to affect his health. Finally, in 1988, 12 years after the event, Jim attended a UFO conference hosted by the researcher Raymond Fowler. Hearing other people describe similar experiences, Jim realized he wasn't alone and that he might not be crazy. He convinced his three friends, who had also been quietly struggling with fragmented memories and a deep sense of unease, to undergo hypnotic regression therapy with Fowler. What emerged from these sessions was, once again, chillingly consistent. Each man, interviewed and hypnotized separately, described the same core narrative. The beam of light had not just illuminated them. It had lifted them, canoe and all, into the silent craft. They described being taken to a dimly lit room where they were undressed and forced onto examination tables. They recalled the same strange, thin-limbed beings with large, metallic-looking eyes. They described how the beings communicated with them telepathically, trying to calm them. They remembered painful samples being taken: skin, blood, fluid. Charlie Fultz, under hypnosis, sobbed as he recounted the sheer helplessness and violation of the experience. The men's independent accounts corroborated each other down to minute details: the texture of the being's skin, the layout of the examination room, the types of instruments used. To further validate their claims, all 4 men passed polygraph tests regarding their conscious memories of the initial event. The Allagash case strengthens the missing time narrative significantly. Here we have 4 credible witnesses, all artists trained in observation, who shared a single, bizarre experience. Their memories, suppressed for over a decade, were unlocked through hypnosis and revealed a story of abduction that was remarkably consistent across all 4 accounts. Skeptics, of course, argue that Fowler, a prominent UFO researcher, may have inadvertently led the witnesses during hypnosis, or that the men, having discussed the event over the years, created a shared, false memory. But this explanation feels insufficient. It doesn't account for the initial, undisputed period of missing time. It doesn't explain the state of the bonfire, a piece of physical evidence that told them, in no uncertain terms, that a significant chunk of their night had been stolen from them, long before any hypnotist or UFO researcher entered the picture. The Allagash 4 went into the woods for a fishing trip and came out with a gaping hole in their timeline, a hole that would eventually be filled with memories so traumatic that it took them over a decade to even begin to confront them. Their story serves as a powerful testament to the group nature of some of these events, making them all the more difficult to explain away. The pattern of strange lights followed by a temporal void is a recurring theme, but the circumstances and witnesses vary dramatically. Let's shift our focus to another case, one that involves younger witnesses in a seemingly idyllic setting: a summer camp. This is the Buff Ledge Camp incident, which took place in Vermont, on the shores of the vast and mysterious Lake Champlain, in the summer of 1969. The 2 primary witnesses were a 16-year-old camp counselor named Michael and a 19-year-old maintenance worker who has only ever been identified as Janet. On the evening of August 7th, they were relaxing on a boat dock, watching the sunset over the lake. The camp was quiet. The children were all in their cabins. It was a peaceful, ordinary summer evening. As dusk settled, they noticed a strange light in the sky. It wasn't a star. It moved with an unnatural speed and trajectory, zipping across the horizon. Suddenly, it changed direction and shot straight up into the air. Then, 2 smaller lights detached from it and began to perform bizarre aerial maneuvers. As they watched, captivated, one of the smaller lights broke away from the others and headed directly towards them. As the light approached, it grew into a large, structured craft. Michael and Janet were frozen in place, not by conscious choice, but by an overwhelming force. A low, humming sound filled the air, vibrating through the dock and into their bodies. They felt a profound sense of paralysis, unable to move, unable to scream. The light from the craft was intensely bright. Their next conscious memory is of sitting on the dock, staring out at a completely dark lake. The sun had long since set. The air was cold. They were both disoriented, with a strange, fuzzy feeling, as if waking from a deep sleep. They looked at each other, confused. The humming was gone. The lights were gone. They had no memory of the craft leaving, no memory of what happened after the light and the sound overwhelmed them. They only knew that a significant amount of time had passed. They looked at their watches. Several hours were missing. Terrified and not knowing what else to do, they said nothing. They went back to their duties, trying to push the bizarre and frightening event out of their minds. What could they say? Who would believe them? They finished the summer at the camp and went their separate ways. The shared but unspoken trauma of that night on the dock sealing a strange bond between them. For years, the memory remained fragmented, a disturbing but incomplete puzzle. It wasn't until 1977, 8 years later, that the case came to the attention of UFO researcher Walter N. Webb. Webb was a thorough investigator, an astronomer by profession, who approached these cases with scientific rigor. He managed to track down both Michael and Janet, who were now adults living in different parts of the country. Independently, they both agreed to undergo hypnotic regression to try and uncover what happened during that gap in time. The results were, yet again, remarkably similar to the patterns we've seen before. Both Michael and Janet recalled being floated off the dock in a beam of light and taken aboard the craft. They described a sterile, white, circular room. They remembered being laid on tables, paralyzed but conscious, as they were examined by tall, thin beings with large, wraparound eyes, long necks, and what appeared to be no ears, nose, or mouth, save for a small slit. Janet's recall was particularly detailed. She remembered a leader figure who seemed to oversee the examination. She described the beings communicating with her telepathically, telling her not to be afraid. She recounted a procedure involving a thin, needle-like instrument. Michael's account corroborated Janet's on nearly every major point. The appearance of the beings, the layout of the room, the feeling of paralysis, and the examination process. What makes the Buff Ledge case so compelling is not just the consistency between the two primary witnesses. After Webb's investigation was published, other potential witnesses came forward. A camp director remembered seeing a strange, silent light over the lake on the same night. A young camper reported seeing a bright light outside his cabin window that evening. These ancillary accounts, while not as dramatic, helped to build a more complete picture, suggesting that something highly unusual was indeed happening at the camp that night. The Buff Ledge incident is a classic missing time case. It starts with a sighting of an unidentified aerial phenomenon, or UAP. It progresses to a close encounter, characterized by strange physical sensations like paralysis and humming sounds. And it culminates in a temporal black hole, a period of lost consciousness that, when later probed by hypnosis, reveals a narrative of non-human interaction and examination. The innocence of the summer camp setting provides a stark, chilling contrast to the cold, clinical, and terrifying nature of the memories that were eventually unearthed. It reminds us that these events aren't confined to lonely highways or deep wilderness. They can intrude upon even the most mundane and seemingly safe corners of our world. So far, the cases we've examined involve a few hours of missing time, a gap that is only filled years later through hypnotic regression. But what happens when the missing time is not hours, but days? And what happens when a person physically vanishes during that period, sparking a massive search and a police investigation? This brings us to perhaps the most well-known, well-documented, and intensely debated case in the history of the phenomenon, the Travis Walton incident. This story doesn't begin with a hazy memory. It begins with a frantic 911 call. On the evening of November 5, 1975, a logging crew in the Apache Sitgreaves National Forest near Snowflake, Arizona, finished their work for the day. 7 men piled into a single pickup truck to head home. The crew's foreman was Mike Rogers. In the truck with him were Ken Peterson, John Gillette, Steve Pierce, Alan Dallas, Dwayne Smith, and the 22-year-old Travis Walton. As they drove down a winding dirt road, they saw a strange, luminous glow coming from over a rise. As they crested the hill, they were confronted with an incredible sight. A large, metallic, saucer-shaped object hovering silently about 15 feet off the ground, emitting a brilliant, yellowish light. It was, by all accounts, a classic flying saucer. The men were stunned into silence. Mike Rogers stopped the truck. Against the frantic shouts of his crewmates, Travis Walton, driven by a surge of adrenaline and disbelief, jumped out of the truck and ran towards the object for a closer look. As he stood beneath it, looking up, the craft began to emit a low humming sound that grew in intensity. Suddenly, a brilliant, bluish-green beam of light shot out from the bottom of the craft and struck Travis. He was lifted slightly into the air, his body rigid, and then thrown back onto the ground with violent force. The 6 remaining men in the truck panicked. Believing Travis was dead, and terrified for their own lives, Mike Rogers floored the accelerator and sped away from the scene. After they had driven a short distance, a moment of guilt and clarity washed over them. They couldn't just leave him there. They turned the truck around and went back. But when they got to the spot where Travis had fallen, he was gone. The craft was gone. There was no trace of him. They searched the area frantically, shouting his name, their flashlights cutting through the growing darkness. But there was nothing. Faced with a horrifying and unbelievable situation, they drove to the nearby town of Heber and reported what had happened to the authorities. The police, understandably, were deeply skeptical. 6 men, visibly terrified, rambling about a UFO abducting their friend? The immediate suspicion was that the men had murdered Travis and concocted a wild story to cover their tracks. A massive search was launched, involving hundreds of volunteers, police officers on foot and horseback, and helicopters. They found nothing. No body, no weapon, no blood, no signs of a struggle. The pressure on the logging crew was immense. They were subjected to intense interrogations by law enforcement, including the state police and the county sheriff. The national media descended on the small town, and the story became a sensation. To clear their names, the 5 of the 6 remaining crew members who were available agreed to take polygraph examinations administered by a respected expert. The results were stunning. All 5 men passed the tests, which indicated they were telling the truth about seeing a UFO and seeing Travis Walton struck by a beam of light. The one inconclusive result was later retested and also passed. The polygraph examiner, Cy Gilson, stated that 5 of them boys was telling the truth, and that it would be virtually impossible for 5 people to collude on such a wild story and all pass a lie detector test. For 5 days, Travis Walton was missing. The search continued, but hope was fading. The theory that his crewmates had harmed him was still the most logical explanation for law enforcement. And then, late on the night of November 10th, 5 days after he had vanished, Travis's brother-in-law received a collect call. On the other end was a weak, confused, and terrified Travis Walton, calling from a payphone at a gas station in Heber, just a few miles from where he had disappeared. When they found him, he was physically and emotionally wrecked. He was dehydrated, had lost over 10 pounds, and had a small puncture mark on his arm. He was wearing the same clothes he had on when he disappeared. And most importantly, he had no memory of the past 5 days. His last clear memory was of the intense pain as the beam of light hit him. He had fragmented, nightmarish flashes of being in a strange room, of seeing bizarre creatures, but nothing coherent. For him, it felt as though only a few hours had passed. The 5 days were a complete blank period of missing time on a scale far beyond most other reported cases. In the years that followed, Travis Walton, like so many others, underwent hypnotic regression to try and recover his lost memories. His story, detailed in his book Fire in the Sky, which was later adapted into a film of the same name, is one of the most detailed and terrifying abduction accounts on record. He recalled waking up on a table in a small, round room. Standing over him were 3 short, bald creatures with large, brown, pupilless eyes and pale, fetal-looking skin. They were the classic grays of abduction lore. Terrified, he fought back, pushing one of them away and scrambling off the table. He ran out of the room and down a hallway into a larger, circular area that resembled a planetarium, with a chair in the center. He saw what looked like a projection of stars on the domed ceiling. Then, a figure that looked human, a tall man with blonde hair and golden eyes, wearing a blue helmet and suit, entered the room, silently motioned for him to follow, and led him out of that craft, through a sort of airlock, and into what appeared to be a massive hangar or mothership. There, he saw other, similar saucer-shaped craft parked. He was then led into another room where other human-looking beings placed a clear, soft mask over his face, and he blacked out. His next memory was of waking up on the side of the highway, seeing the saucer-shaped craft depart silently into the night sky. The Travis Walton case is a landmark. It has everything: multiple witnesses, physical disappearance, a massive police search, past polygraph tests, and a detailed account of the abduction experience. Skeptics have tried to pick it apart for decades. They point to inconsistencies in the crew's initial stories, though these are arguably normal for people in a state of terror. They suggest the entire event was a hoax, a scheme to get rich or famous, though the men have largely shunned the spotlight and the financial gain has been minimal compared to the ridicule and disruption to their lives. The case remains one of the most powerful and perplexing examples of a missing time event, one that played out not just in the mind of a single individual, but in the real world, witnessed by many and documented by law enforcement. It forces us to ask, if it wasn't an abduction, then where was Travis Walton for 5 days? And how did 6 men manage to convince a polygraph expert they were telling the truth about one of the most incredible stories ever told? We have journeyed through these chilling accounts off Betty and Barney Hill on a dark New Hampshire road, of the Allagash Four on a remote Maine lake, of the counselors at Buff Ledge Camp, and of Travis Walton in the forests of Arizona. Each story is unique, yet they are all woven together by that common, terrifying thread: a piece of their lives sliced out of time, leaving a wound in their memory that may never fully heal. So what are we to make of this? What could possibly explain this through this tear in the fabric of time and personal experience? The theories are as varied and complex as the stories themselves. The first and most sensational explanation is, of course, the extraterrestrial hypothesis. This is the theory that the stories recovered under hypnosis are true, that beings from another world are visiting our planet, and for reasons we can only guess at, they are temporarily abducting human beings. In this view, the missing time is the period during which the abduction and examination take place. The memory loss is a deliberate act by the abductors, a screen memory or a mind block put in place to prevent trauma or to keep their activities secret. The consistency across cases, the description of the gray aliens, the examination rooms, the medical procedures, the telepathic communication is cited as evidence of a genuine, shared phenomenon. Proponents argue that it's statistically improbable for so many people, from different cultures and time periods, to independently invent such similar, specific details. The star map from the Hill case and the past polygraph tests from the Walton case are held up as powerful, albeit not definitive, pieces of evidence supporting this incredible theory. But we must also approach this with a healthy dose of skepticism, and that brings us to the crucial role of hypnosis. Hypnotic regression therapy is a controversial tool. Memory is not a video recording. It's a reconstructive process, malleable and highly susceptible to suggestion. A hypnotist, even with the best intentions, can unintentionally lead a subject, planting ideas or reinforcing certain narratives. The phenomenon of confabulation, where the brain creates false memories to fill in gaps, is very real. A person experiencing a period of missing time is desperate for an explanation. Under hypnosis, in a highly suggestible state, the brain might seize upon cultural narratives, images from movies, books, and TV shows about aliens to construct a story that makes sense of the inexplicable. It's possible that the memories of abduction are not recovered memories, but created ones. This doesn't mean the person is lying. To them, the memory feels completely authentic. But it raises serious questions about the validity of anything recalled exclusively through hypnosis. This leads us to our second major category of explanations: the psychological and neurological. Our brains are fantastically complex organs, but they are not infallible. There are a number of known conditions that can produce experiences that mimic the core elements of a missing time event. For instance, certain types of temporal lobe epilepsy can cause seizures that lead to altered states of consciousness, vivid hallucinations that can be auditory or visual, and significant memory gaps. The person experiencing it might not even realize they've had a seizure. Then there are dissociative states like a fugue state. Triggered by extreme stress or trauma, a person can essentially check out from reality. They might wander off, perform complex actions, and have no memory of it afterward. Could the terrifying sight of a strange light in the sky, perhaps a misidentified conventional aircraft or a rare atmospheric phenomenon like ball lightning, be enough to trigger such a state? We also have to consider phenomena related to sleep. Sleep paralysis is a terrifying but common experience where the brain wakes up but the body remains temporarily paralyzed. It is often accompanied by hypnagogic or hypnopompic hallucinations, incredibly vivid and often frightening visions and sounds that occur as you're falling asleep or waking up. People in this state often report feeling a presence in the room, seeing shadowy figures, feeling pressure on their chest, and hearing strange noises. It's not a huge leap to see how these elements could be interpreted as an alien visitation, especially if the person is already culturally primed for such an explanation. While this primarily explains bedroom encounters, it speaks to the brain's ability to create profoundly real, yet entirely internal experiences. Finally, we venture into the territory of the truly strange, the theories that push the boundaries of physics and our understanding of reality itself. Some have proposed the idea of time slips, where a person might momentarily slip out of our standard flow of time, or perhaps into a parallel dimension. In this view, the missing time isn't a memory gap. The person was literally elsewhere or elsewhen for that period. This is, of course, highly speculative, bordering on science fiction, but it's an attempt to explain the phenomenon without resorting to either aliens or brain malfunctions. It fits within a broader category of glitch in the matrix theories, which posit that our reality is not as solid and continuous as it appears. What if missing time is simply a bug in the code, a brief system crash in our personal timeline? So where does this leave us? We are faced with a spectrum of possibilities. On one end, we have incredible stories of extraterrestrial contact, supported by multiple witnesses and circumstantial evidence. On the other end, we have a host of plausible, scientifically grounded psychological and neurological explanations that could account for many, if not all, of these experiences. And in the middle lies a vast, gray area of uncertainty. Perhaps there is no single answer. It's possible, even probable, that the term missing time is an umbrella that covers a variety of different phenomena. Some cases might be explained by undiagnosed medical conditions. Others might be the product of stress and the brain's own talent for storytelling. And some might just remain stubbornly, tantalizingly unexplained. What we cannot and should not dismiss is the profound human element at the heart of every one of these stories. Regardless of the ultimate cause, be it a glitch in the brain or a visitor from the stars, the experience is real for the person who lives through it. The terror, the confusion, the sense of violation, and the lifelong quest for answers are genuine. These are not just spooky stories to be told in the dark. They are the deeply personal chronicles of individuals whose lives were irrevocably altered when a piece of their existence was taken from them. The mystery of missing time is a mirror. It reflects our deepest fears about a loss of control, a loss of self. It challenges our comfortable assumptions about the stability of memory and the linear, unbreakable nature of time. It reminds us that there are still vast, uncharted territories, not just in the cosmos, but within the landscape of human consciousness itself. The truth, as it so often is, remains elusive, hiding in the shadows between what we know for certain and what we are perhaps afraid to imagine. And that brings our exploration to a close for tonight. But the conversation is far from over. This is a phenomenon that thrives on shared experience and collective questioning. So now I turn it over to you. What do you think is behind the phenomenon of missing time? Are you convinced by the extraterrestrial hypothesis? Or do you lean towards a psychological or neurological explanation? Do you believe in something else entirely paranormal or interdimensional cause? And more importantly, have you, or has anyone you know, ever experienced something like this? A moment, an hour, a day that just vanished? A gap in your memory that defies any logical explanation? The comments section is a space for us to continue this investigation together. Share your theories, your personal stories, and your thoughts on the cases we've discussed tonight. Every perspective adds another piece to this impossibly complex puzzle. If you found this deep dive into the unknown as fascinating as I did, please consider showing your support by liking this video and subscribing to the channel. It helps immensely and ensures that we can continue to explore these enigmatic corners of our world together. Click the notification bell so you won't miss our next journey into the uncharted. Thank you for lending me your time. I hope none of it goes missing. Until next time, stay curious and question everything.